Uh, First, thank you, Marina, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. I hope you are all safe in your places in this difficult moment that we are facing everywhere. As Marina said, I'm Eduardo Urias. I am Assistant Professor of Innovation Participation Science Shop to the Athena Institute at the VU in Amsterdam. Today, I will present the main results of one article that we published in Futures together with some colleagues at the VU, but also other co-authors like Rosina Malagrida from the Living Lab UC Caixa and Norbert Steinhaus from the Science Shop Bonn. I see that Professor Marjolaine Zwieghorst, who also a co-author, is here. I don't see Norbert. I don't know, but I cannot see everybody. Uh, but it's a joint work that we did as part of InSPIRES, and I will go through this framework for science shop process that we collectively developed. And if you have questions, you can use the chat, and then we can also have a discussion during and at the end when I finish the presentation. We'll start with a little the context in this research, because Marina briefly introduced the ambition of InSPIRES, and due to the historical roots, science shops, they have been presented as potential models to translate responsible research innovation and open science policies into practice due to their ability and capacity to enhance the research practices, linking researchers, students, and other staff with societal actors. Therefore, our starting point was how we could conceptualize science shops in a way that they can really fulfill this potential, how they can build stronger links with principles and dimensions of those policy frameworks, such as responsible research, innovation, and open science. So we had a working concept in the beginning that was Science Shop 2.0, and you will see this in some points in my presentation. So this is how we had this working concept to refer to science shops that could explicitly integrate responsible research innovation, open science, and also community-based participatory research principles and dimensions in their functioning. And how we did it, so you saw in the title that I mentioned a modified Delphi approach. So Delphi is a technique to reach consensus, how we can reach group consensus about a particular issue, about a particular topic. So here we would like to reach some consensus in terms of how we could really conceptualize science shops, like identifying, integrating dimensions of RRI, community-based participatory research in open science, and also consensus on the feasibility and desirability of implementing these elements into science shop practice. So how this Delphi looked like? So we started with literature review on those major topics, so responsible research innovation, community-based participatory research, and open science. So we developed a questionnaire. So this was the first round. So we have an online questionnaire that we submitted only to InSPIRES members. So then we had 15 participants in this round. And then in the second round, based on the answers of the first, I will go through a little bit into detail in a moment, but have an iteration based on the points, especially that we didn't reach consensus in the first round, and had a new questionnaire uh, uh, submitted to the same panelists, the same 15 participants. We could also have a third round that was it was not online anymore. It was a physical meeting held in Amsterdam with 18 participants. And then these three rounds, they were only within the InSPIRES project. So only participants of InSPIRES could give their input. But of course, we are aware that the world is much bigger and the science shop world is way more diverse. So we had a workshop, so external panel during the Living Knowledge conference in Budapest, so where we could have 30 practitioners and other people involved with participatory research and science shops. So they were not members of the InSPIRES project. So we could present our preliminary ideas, our preliminary framework, and based on that, see how we would move forward. So now I will explain a little bit more in detail like these 3 rounds and what we got after it. So in the idea for the first round, so we had this literature review, and then we developed claims in relation to those 3 concepts: so responsible research, innovation, participatory research, and open science. And to illustrate what we did, so we, of course, it's more detail, and you can refer also to the article to read it in more detail. But just to give you an idea, we conceptualized responsible research innovation mainly based on this process dimension: anticipation, reflexivity, inclusion, and responsiveness, and framing it how it would work in a science shop. And then we asked the participants or the panelists first to what extent they believe RRI is an important element of what we called at that time Science Shop 2.0, so our working concept, and to what extent those process dimensions were important element for science shop work. And we did it similarly for the others. So we did it similar for community-based participatory research. So we offer how literature could conceptualize community-based participatory research, so involving community members at the level of input. So communities, they initiate research ideas and projects, or the level of process, where communities remain intimately engaged throughout, for instance, data collection, data analysis, and interpretation of data and results, or at the level of outcome. So communities would play a significant role in mobilizing the knowledge for social change. So we follow more or less the same structure here. So we ask it, is it an important element? Should then communities be involved at these 3 levels: input, process, and outcomes? And other questions such as to what extent those elements are important deciding what will be done in the science shop, or how or what will be implemented in the project, how to interpret the results, how to disseminate the results. So these were the initial claims that we used in round 1. And finally, for open science, we based the main approach was conceptualizing open science according to 5 different schools of thought. So first, the public school of open science that focus more on the accessibility of knowledge, accessibility in terms of participation in the research, but also how to make it more comprehensible to a wider audience. The pragmatic school that really resembles like with open innovation. So it's more about how we can modularize knowledge, how we can have external sources of knowledge, not only academic, but other actors outside the normal chain of production of knowledge. We have the infrastructure school that focus more on internet. So these like peer-to-peer, wisdom of the crowds for open knowledge production. The next, the democratic schools that looks more at the output level. So like more like what we see, like this open access, how we make results and data available to others. And the measurement school that's more about challenging how we measure science and science achievement, and in terms of, for instance, impact, not going beyond the impact factor, for instance, citations, how we can have alternative ways to measure the impact of science. And then we asked our project members how they perceive this. First, is open science relevant? And then if those schools represent what we would like to show in the conceptualization of science shops. And when we ask them for that, then you can see here, I don't expect you to see like here have the claims, But just to give an idea of like agreement or disagreement, because if you remember, I said the Delphi is about reaching consensus. So you can see that these oranges are people who partially disagree, and the reds are those that, oh, they really disagree with statements. So if you look at the claim number 11 was about the infrastructure school. So I said, looking at open science from a more technological point of view, focusing on internet, on digitalization, there was a disagreement on that, but there are also disagreements in terms, I can provide examples here. So we could also have room for qualitative data. So it's not only about I agree or I disagree. All the participants could justify why they would agree or disagree. So examples like this, okay, this first about participatory research, it was maybe it's not necessary or possible to involve all the stakeholders in all phases. This also has to be considered the resources available, like time, money, and other issues that will affect the degree of participation. Or the other that was more critical about the RRI framework. So how we can make sure that we are talking about RRI, but not in a tick box approach, that we have the box to tick, so, okay, oh, this is RRI or is not RRI. So based on this, we went back to the literature and then said how we can provide new claims, new proposals to address, let's say, this critique that the panelists offered to us and achieved our goal of consensus. So if we look from the RRI perspective, so then we reframe it, the process dimensions, making it slightly different. We took the dimensions for the RRI tools that are based on that framework that I mentioned before, and try to make it more connected to what we would see in a science shop. And then we asked participants again. Now this different formulation is better suited to the context of science shops as we discussed. And about the question of community-based participatory research, so how we can balance participation. So the proposal that we made two proposals. One was about looking at what kind of question, concern needs to be addressed in the science shop. So this a distinction between simple like problems, so problems that can be answered with less involvement. So for instance, if community is interested in what are the existing healthcare services for people with Chagas diseases in a given neighborhood of Barcelona. So then it's about identifying what are those places, where are those unities. Whereas when you go to complex problems, when problems that like these wicked problems that are even hard to identify what the problem is, there are not much consensus on it. So then the participatory level would be a higher participatory level would be required. So that was the proposal that we made to the participants, and that is the claims that you can see in the screen. So one is linking the level of participation to the complexity of the question, and the other was about, yeah, resources are limited, like the quote I mentioned. So there might be many different obstacles. Resources is one of them, but there are certainly others. And depending a lot on the context and even cultural factors can be barriers to participation. So how science shops need to adapt as much as possible to address the obstacles that can prevent participation. In open science, there was like in terms of which school would be more relevant or predominant, then we could make this link with the democratic public, focusing more on the democratic, the public school and the measurement school, and offer this conceptualization to the participants. And we also in the second round tried to make a first attempt of framework. So we tried to put those elements together, and we presented this picture that may look a little bit complex. I don't know how big they are in your screen, but basically we conceptualize the design shop as a unit. So that is part of a broader organization. So you can see the blue sphere is the design shop that's part of another organization. And you could see that questions or concerns would come from civil society, or could be science inverted, reverse science cafe, or other public engagement activities. They would have elements of traditional or how of science shops, like how the question needs to be reformulated, how the project would be executed, but then elements what we called at that time the 2.0, which would focus more on participation in open science. And you can see that the RRI process dimension then are outside together with other stakeholders, because they are all part of a broader context. So there is a policy framework, so it would influence this practice in a different way. So we asked the participants to what extent they agree with this framework, if they represent what we would like to conceptualize science shops. And there in round 2, we still could not solve the disagreements. You could see we still had a disagreement, and in most of the proposals that we made. So we still had a disagreement in terms of the RRI framework. We still had disagreement in terms of the complexity of the research question, and also in the framework that we proposed. So I can illustrate this disagreement in those quotes. So for instance, somebody asked, what is a complex question? Who defines if a question is complex or is not complex? And the other panelists would say, yeah, the framework really looks like a science shop that is in a university, but this is not the only way that science shop can be organized or conceptualized. So this framework is too narrow. And then we had the third round, that was a physical meeting in Amsterdam. So then we could present new proposals on how we could reach consensus. So to address the complexity of questions, so then we use this Stacy matrix. So we could try to conceptualize complexity in 2 axes. One is the level of agreement that there is in a given problem. So to what extent there are conflicts of interest or how power is distributed among the stakeholders involved with a given problem or issue, and the level of certainty in terms of what is known about it, to what extent knowledge about the problem is public, is shareable, is accessible. And this combination could lead to different characterizations of complexity. So if you have problems that is a high level of disagreement and a high level of uncertainty, these problems are more complex. Whereas you have more certainty and more agreement, then it becomes less complex. So in between simple and very complex, there are other problems types that will vary in their degree of complexity as these 2 dimensions of agreement and certainty would vary. So we offered to the panelists this conceptualization of complexity to solve the disagreement about the type of research, the type of approach, the level of participation could vary according to the complexity level by this definition. So the more complex, the more participation is required to address a given societal issue. And we also provided then with an alternative framework with the aim to be a little more flexible and not only embedded in universities. So another conceptualization similar to the previous one that would attempt to represent a science shop that's not university based. So this was our, let's say, end point in the Delphi amongst participants, because then we finally could reach consensus on this. But we didn't stop. So then, as I explained it in the methods, we had this panel discussion in the Living Knowledge Conference in Budapest. So we had 30 participants there, and our aims with that session was first to assess with a broader audience to what extent these frameworks, so these two pictures that I showed so far, would make sense to them, and to what extent we could identify challenges and opportunity if we implement it or these frameworks. And it was a very interesting meeting. So we had a focus group setting. So we had 3 groups where we could discuss. And I can present you some quotes because we could really learn a lot from that panel discussion. So I think some points that were raised that first, it was again too narrow. It was still representing Science Shop as a unit that provides research only, and that we learn more about other contexts where science shops, they work close to community, they address problems without like a research process behind it. They are like in this quote, they say, well, we have the same starting point, but they find solution without research. They find solutions with practice. And the other that say, yeah, this is still look a bit too top down because they're in a science shop or in her science shop, there is no hierarchy. Everybody's at the same level. Everybody learn together, not only so teachers or researchers, they train the others, but others are also training them. They are all, science shop is a space for mutual learning. So of course, we got much more input in that meeting, but when we put them together, then we made another step for a new framework. So we could also have a participatory approach in our methodology. So really embedding the knowledge from the field into our practice. And this is what we came up with. So we started with the notion of like this widely used definition of science shop as science shop providing independent participatory research support in response to concerns experienced by civil society. So then we placed the RRI stakeholders next to the science shop, but these concerns experienced by civil society could be expressed directly by the civil society, either like the general public or through civil society organizations. But these concerns could also be expressed by other stakeholders like policymakers, that they can identify some issues that need to be addressed, or even the education community. For instance, at the University Amsterdam have a very strong community-centered learning program that is also linked to the civil society from an educational perspective. There could be the research community and even business and industry. So these concerns can come from different directions. And also the science shop itself also is actively looking for concerns, that not is passively waiting for questions to arise. So they interact in the system, and issues and concerns are identified together. And when we look at this type of question, so then we have an adapted version of the matrix that I showed you. So we have approaches like when you higher complexity. So the orange represents a higher degree of participation, and the green and lower complexity, so a lower degree of participation. But it requires knowledge, skills, and attitudes from all stakeholders involved to be able to set up such a process, but also to benefit and to realize social change through this approach. And this is all embedded in a broader context. So the RRI stakeholders, they are connected. We have the RRI policy framework that would influence the phases of the research of the science shop. So we have here the preparation of the research, the design implementation, the monitoring evaluation, the dissemination of the results. And this is not linear. These are really an iterative process where the science shop is involved and play a central role. So to close my presentation, I think that these are the main contribution that we believe we could make with this research, that we could conceptualize science shops in a way that is a process or rather than an organizational unit. So after the 3 rounds in this panel, our approach evolved from a pure university-based model to a process-based framework that's way more flexible, and it can capture processes that are not really limited to research. So they are specialized, science shops are specialized in public engagement activities that includes communication, mediation, advocacy, moderation, consultancy, evaluation, and others. So this framework is way more flexible, and we could see questions coming from a different range of stakeholders, so not so making it broader, and also the science shop playing an active role identifying these questions and societal constraints, and making sure that we are not claiming that science shops needs to address complex questions or simple questions or something between. They address different types of questions, and they are actively involving the public and the society to address these questions and deliver and achieve social change. So that is what I had to present. So now I think we have the floor open for your questions and discussions.
Yes, that's right, Eduardo. So we invite you to post your questions through the chat or even activating your microphone. So I see right now that we don't have any questions at the moment.
I have more remark. Thank you, Eduardo, for the presentation, but I can imagine for the people listening to this that it is a little bit abstract. I was also co-author of this paper, and I used the framework in practice. So I think it would be nice if I tell a little bit about the practical application of the framework. So as Eduardo explained, you would like to do it in collaboration with the community. So the first thing we did at our university is also do the agenda setting in a participatory way with the community. And there are various ways to do it. The way we did it is, and it's a pity that Rosina is not here because she could have given a different example of having a policy agenda setting with communities. We organize it in a course in which we prepare the students really for an inclusive dialogue in and with the community. So they learn, it's a 3 EC course, it takes 2 months. At the end of the course, the highlight is really in this going into discussion with the local communities. And we did it for the first time 2 years ago. And then it was off outside of the university in a local community, and we invited, in the end, 100 people were coming, and we prepared the students for this dialogue. And from the dialogue, we learned various issues that were at stake at these local communities. And to give one example that came out is the theme of loneliness. And if you look back, maybe otherwise you can have that screen on about the complexity of the issue. Because this loneliness is, I think, a very good example of a complex issue. Huh? It's not straightforward how to address, because probably also for different communities, you need to address it in a different way. So you need to involve the lonely people in itself to address it. It's also not straightforward how to address it. So this loneliness is, I think, a very good example of a high-level complex question. In order to address it, you also need probably various stakeholders. And what we did, because it's so complex, we didn't believe that one group or one student could address loneliness. This is a long, complex problem. So what we did, we implemented in various courses, students conducted activities in and with society, in and with local community in this case, to work on this issue of loneliness. And then with the help of various courses, one course, the students really went to the local communities. We collaborated with how do you say that in English? A living corporation. So a corporation that cares for social living conditions in an area in Amsterdam. And they really would like also to know what they could do to address loneliness. So these students really went to all these people in these living conditions, and that's a benefit to have students because their amount was quite high. And we learned various interesting issues about loneliness, and the students came up with all kind of very interesting advices. Also, we didn't expect at first place. For example, in our supermarket, for example, you can get coffee for free, and it turned out that this coffee machine within the supermarket was a very good strategy to work against loneliness, because lonely people, they all need to go shopping. So then you can stay, there's normally in this coffee corner, now not with COVID, of course, but it used to be a small bench in the supermarket with this coffee machine. So it's a very low threshold opportunity to meet other people. Now, so they had some, now you can call it an intervention, but some strategies that already worked, but they also came up with some new strategies. Like they came up with advices to strengthen social cohesion. They came with strategies also to identify the lonely people, the communication strategies to reach out to them. So it's numerous what came out of this. And we're still working on loneliness, but of course, because we haven't addressed it completely as yet, but different strategies are taking place. So I think the more complex the problems become, the longer you can keep working on it. This is what we did in the Netherlands. I personally would like to know whether other people might find this, what their opinion is about this framework. Is this useful? Maybe also in your context, or so maybe somebody could reflect on that.
Thank you, Marlene, for your intervention and remark.
Hi, this is Eileen speaking from Queen's University in Belfast. I'm not sure if I have understood you properly, but it does feel to me that by running a 2-month training module, you have replaced one structure, as in a science shop structure, with another structure. And I wonder if you could just, have I understood you properly?
The question is to me?
Yes, I mean, as you're giving us an example.
You can stop share screening, then we have a little bit bigger screen for the ones that are present.
Yes, just from the example you've given, it feels to me that you're saying the science shop's not a structure, it's a process, which I absolutely agree, the process is part of it. But in fact, it feels to me if you've had to implement a 2-month training module, then you have simply replaced one structure with another structure. And I'm not sure if I have understood that properly.
Yeah. No, yeah, for instance, we have a science shop, of course, and some questions are coming to the science shop, and that's probably what you mean. And then the science shop makes sure that question is addressed, and that could also be a quite complex problem. But the problem like loneliness would never have come to the science shop, because there's no one that will define the owners of the loneliness problem would never have reached out to the science shop. So by doing, we have this course in an edit, so it's an add-on to our science shop to reach out to communities which otherwise would not have reached our science shop. Because to have a question formulated, you already need a kind of structure. You need to own the problem for a sense. So it's a lot of local organizations and things like that that address their question to us. But now we're talking to real community members, really people living in that area, would don't even know the existence of a science shop.
Yeah, if I could add, I thank you for your question. I think it's relevant, but what I'd like to add that we are not it was probably not clear in my presentation, but we're not claiming that the science shops are no longer a structure. Of course, many science shops, they are still an organizational structure, but they are so context dependent that there's no way that we can describe how those all structures may be. So then we look at it from a process that different unities, different structures could apply in their own way. So if I look at the example that Marilyn mentioned, then we still have a structure that connects to society, helps to work together in identifying societal constraints, and use, in that example, other educational structures to address those constraints. So the science shop is still there, the unit is still there, the organization is still there, but the framework, it just describes how it works in a process, regardless of where or how this organizational unit belongs to, or how it is called. It could be a science shop, could be a living lab, could be other names that we use and are used that follow more or less the same approach.
Yes, that's helpful for me. Thank you. I understand it better now.
You're welcome. Do you also are involved in science shops yourself, Eileen?
Yes, I manage the science shop at Queen's University in Belfast, and I do agree with you that we talk when we're working with our students and with our community organisations. Process is very much part of the conversations that we're having, but at the same time, the structure of the science shop has been fundamental in moving change and making change in the university and trying to open up the university. The structure has also been important, but I think I do agree with you both that the science shop processes are also very important, and maybe we need to think about how we can expand the use of these kinds of processes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I see in the chat that Anna shared something about loneliness in her own context. I don't know, and if you would like to say more about it to us.
Yeah, hi. I think if the science shop person, who is me, you see, is frequently out in the community and frequently meeting with marginalized groups, you have that process built in to the science shop. If it's user friendly, and just because it's in the university doesn't mean that you're removed from people in the community. So my experience that we've had small projects involving students who have worked with, there's an organization in Cork called Friendly Call Cork, which is an outreach to lonely people in Cork, and volunteers make a daily phone call to lonely people. And that we've had a small project with a student who's done research and, thereby given a voice to those lonely people. So, but I do agree with the whole process concept, and that it shouldn't be so rigid, which I think it is many times in the science shop. I think we need to be flexible, and yeah, maybe it doesn't always have to be a piece of research. It could be just be, a group work, or it doesn't have to be so academic.
If I can respond, completely agree. And with this course, it's not that we don't have the linkages to community, but we also like to train students in it so that they also do it in the further career. And I think this is something, I think that's in line with you say, that is normally not trained in academia, to have a talk and a dialogue with community members. So our main aim is to train students and then hope to inspire them. They will do and take this on in their future careers. And of course, the linkages with all the community partners also work. But to have a dialogue with the people, it's really involved by the students themselves. I think that can really change mindsets.
Yeah, and if I could link back to our ambition, like I said, how we can conceptualize science shops in a way that they can deliver or fulfill this ambition of diffusion, scaling up, responsible research, innovation, open science practices, then looking at it from a process perspective is also helpful, because then you are not bounded by a particular organizational models. is about how different unities in different circumstances, in different contexts can apply that model. How can they make this bridge between society and give a voice to groups that are often excluded, either in a research process or in an educational process, or like in advocacy or consultancy, as some science shops work. So it's all about different, there is a huge diversity in ways how science shops can really include those that are often excluded. And the process is, in my perspective, is a more powerful message than the organization itself. So like the structure itself is more like the methodology behind it and the values behind it that are really the driving force and the more powerful message that science shops deliver since the beginning in the 70s.
Thank you, Eduardo and Marilyn, for answering these questions. I have another question. I know that this framework sounds amazing, and I hope that in the future all science shops look like this one. But how can we move towards the implementation of this framework right now? So do we have any tools or any information that other science shops can apply to move towards this approach?
Yeah. Thank you, Marina, for your questions. As Marina said, like here I presented the article that is conceptual and abstract. We are also, because in InSPIRES we had the pilot projects, have like more than 30 or projects that we could relate to the framework and also learn from the framework. So we could think about how we could like have self-reflection tools or have self-reflection moments together with communities, defining the complexity of the question, or to manage the right, let's say, or the best participatory level throughout the process. And what we are busy with now is also to develop like the e-learning platform where we can include like resources and materials and also contextualized examples of how we could achieve those goals. So how in different locations the participatory aspect is realized according to a given problem, or how we could include the reflexivity and ethics components throughout the process and through different stakeholders, right? So we learned also from practice, but also in the field, that science shops that work with researchers, academic researchers, often they feel that this also the researchers need to be better, let's say, contextualizing the ambitions that it's not only a publication that's our goal. We want to realize social change. So how we can also deliver content that will not, of course, change this overnight, but to raise awareness and give some handles to move towards our ultimate ambition. I don't know if it is answering full your question, but yeah, we are indeed working also how we can continue with these pilots and conceptualize them within the framework, and producing learning materials for different stakeholders in relation to this framework.
Thank you, Eduardo. So I see that we have another question from Hannah Hoff. She says, talking about science shops 2.0, it is quite interesting that technology digitalization seemed to play no important role. Would it be maybe a further step thinking what channels technology can be used to support the work?
Hi, Hannah, thank you for your question. I would start that the Science Shop 2.0 was like a working concept, but we during the process we stopped using it because it's highly controversial, in a sense that if we have a 2.0, then we have also a 1.0. So what is 1.0 and 2.0? So we just look it from like an overarching perspective, so simply science shop process. But I think your point is relevant in a way that it's really context dependent. I wouldn't say that technology does not play a role. It's just like that conceptualization of open science according to the infrastructure school emphasizes or or reduces open science in a, let's say, technology oriented way. So it's really about crowdsourcing or this wisdom of the crowds, and is more than that. I wouldn't say that we should get rid of that, but there are, especially also a discussion that is more, let's say, developing more and more how we can build links between or stronger links with citizen sciences that usually relies on the many citizen science methodologies that rely strongly in internet or in digitalization to collect data or to spread that with different citizens groups. So I believe this is certainly an area that can be further investigated, and keeping in mind, of course, each context, because we must be careful not to exclude also communities and groups that would not have access to those technologies. So if we look even like here in the Netherlands, one of the topics was a digital inclusion. So if we emphasize too much the role of technology, automatically we are excluding those that cannot really take part of that. So finding the balance, I think, is important, but it's certainly something that can be part of it. I wouldn't say that they don't play any role.
Thank you, Eduardo. There's another comment in the chat from Wes that says, I found the diagram in section 456 in the paper most useful in understanding the process and effects. So maybe, Wes, if you could elaborate further on this comment.
I won't elaborate too much. If you just look at the picture, I mean, that's the easiest thing to do.
I think it's the similar one, Eduardo, as you showed in the presentation.
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Is it figure 7 in the article, I think?
Is this what you mean, Wes?
Yes.
Yeah, this is how I must say that making this picture, it was not an easy task, and it's because it's very hard to represent this visually. But the idea, it was really first in a way that we have if you see this blue circle, the structure is still there. So this is also in relation to my answer to the first comment. The structure is still there, but the process is not linear. There are many entry points, and the different stakeholders may play different roles. And the context is there, and the policy framework of RRI is ideally embedded in the science rock process. I don't know if you would like to add more, or your own understanding of this picture. It would also be welcome, Wes.
Oh, no, it's fine. I just thought it was a very useful picture to go back to.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that.
So I don't know if the others have any questions. So now it's the time to write down them on the chat. Otherwise, we would finalize this webinar.
Hannah, I don't know if my answer to your question was clear, or if you want to elaborate on what I told you, that we still have time for that if you want.
Which one?
No, Hannah, who asked about technology.
I would just use my microphone. I think that's easier. No, that's fine. It was just one of the points I was still thinking about. Thanks a lot for this. I'm still into thinking it. So I'm belonging to a German science shop from University of Fechter, from a very small university. And I totally agree that the process thinking, but yeah, I'm trying to fit our projects which are ongoing into it. So if it could work that way, and I think it's, as you said, like every question raises, I think, a new start for setting up the process in a different way, because you always have different groups of stakeholders and different histories that have to be included. And yeah, but thanks a lot. I think it's a great starting point for self-reflection and moving on with science shop work.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, so in case there are no more questions, we would close this webinar. So thank you very much for all of you for contributing in it. And thanks to you, Eduardo and Marilyn, for explaining further this framework for science shops. And well, I hope you got inspired by this framework and it's applicable to your own science shop processes. And well, I hope to see you in the next InSPIRES webinars. Although the project will finish in summer, we will organize further workshops. So stay tuned. And that's all from my side. So thanks to all of you for being here, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all.
Eduardo, if you want to add anything, or Marilyn.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Marina, for organizing these in behalf of InSPIRES, and thank everybody for being here, and especially those who wrote interesting comments and questions that help us also to reflect further on the next steps of this work.
Thank you all, and we hope the framework will inspire your projects and also inspire you to working on it further. Thank you all.
So thank you again. And well, I would like to remind you that this webinar will be uploaded, and we will also send you an evaluation form, and in which you will be able to propose new topics for these upcoming months if you want to. So thank you, and bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.